It's excellent to be here this morning and bring you greetings from Sharon Mennonite Church in Plain City. And today is a special day. It's a day of celebration, a day when we think about youth ministry, the history of youth ministry, here at Bethel in honor of the celebration of the Quasquicentennial. Did I get it right? Awesome. Okay, the Quasquicentennial. And oftentimes when we think about events like this, it makes us think back in our history, to reflect on the past. And so this week, as I was preparing for the message, I began to think about my own past. And I began to think back of a time when I was a youth. Back to these wild years. These years when you could still lick a stamp. The years when internet was only dial-up. The years where you could still roll down your car window with the power of your arm. And those years that we all thought that the world was going to end from something called Y2K. Yes, these were the wild and exciting years of the late 90s into the early 2000s when I was a junior high and high school youth. And as I was thinking about that time, and as I was thinking about the passage today, Jesus feeding the 5,000, I began to think about a certain characteristic that was in my life during that time. You see, when I was an adolescent, I was really, really hungry. I was really hungry. And you might think, well, that's common. Adolescent boys, they eat a lot. I was involved in sports, so of course you're hungry all the time. And maybe my health choices, they weren't the best. As it turns out, eating a lot of chips and Hostess products and ice cream, those things don't have a whole lot of nutritional value to them. So I was hungry. But this hunger wasn't just surface level hunger. This hunger was deeper. There was this deep sense of hunger that was biting at my soul. This deep hunger that I just wanted something to take away the pain of not being good enough or just being enough in general. This hunger that I wanted something to give meaning to my life because I was tired of playing the popularity game that I often failed at. And there was this hunger just to be made whole again because I was tired of feeling broken. And it was during this time that a certain adult in my life, my grandfather, many of you have met, had a significant impact on my life. For he pointed me towards the one who was the bread of life, the one who could take away my hunger. And he kept pointing me towards Jesus, kept praying with me, kept asking me to read my Bible. And as I read my Bible, I began to hear the words of Jesus whisper into my soul. And I began to have that hunger filled. I began to feel this fullness, this satisfaction within my soul. God wasn't just calling me to be filled. God was also calling me to feed others. And I felt during that time how God was calling me out to feed those in the world around me, but I didn't feel like I had enough. And that's what we see in our story today. For in our story today, we see people who are very hungry. In fact, the disciples, even before this story begins, the disciples were people characterized by hunger. They were hungering for something in their lives, to give their lives meaning. We see within the gospel narratives, some of them were trying to satisfy that hunger by joining with the Roman regime and being tax collectors. Others tried to satisfy this hunger through violent and bloody revolution. Others just tried to ignore the hunger and just carry on with daily life. But each and every one of them, when they encounter Jesus, something happens. Something happens in their life. That fractured fractions of their life were made whole through the bread of life. They are filled up. This hunger is taken away, but it's not just taken away just for their own benefit. For Jesus calls each and every one of them to feed those around them through the basketfuls of living bread that Jesus had fed them. And that is what we see within our story. And so let's enter into the story this morning and wrestle with the themes that we see within it. For as we enter into the story, there on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, we find Jesus and the disciples. And it is a scene of excitement mixed with pain. For there's this great excitement for the disciples, or the apostles, as it says there, the sent out ones in this case, have returned. And they've returned from this great evangelistic mission. They've gone out. They've proclaimed the word of God. They fed people. They healed the sick. They drove out demons. And now they've come back and they're pressing around Jesus. They're excited about this. They're excited to tell Jesus the good news of what has happened in their lives. But also during this time, the report comes to Jesus that his cousin, John the Baptist, is dead, is beheaded. And also in the midst of all this excitement and pain, there's this swirl and crush of the crowd as people are coming and going, and they're just crowding in around Jesus and the disciples, and they're hungry. And so Jesus says, let's go away so that we can eat and rest. And Jesus then takes them into the far country, into a place that Mark points out. Mark points this out 3 times. It is a lonely place. And he sets out to this far country, and it is there in this far country that Jesus would teach them the fullness of what it means to feast on God's goodness. You see, no sooner do they land in that lonely place, that deserted place, that desolate desert place, than the crowd follows them and is there waiting for them. The hunger pains within their soul have overflowed, and they just want something to take away their hunger. And so they rush into the wilderness after Jesus. They rush to find meaning into the place of desolation. And we can see this in the world around us even. We can see how people in the world around us, they are so hungry for something to take away the hunger pains of their soul that people run into the deserted, desolate places, just trying to find meaning, just trying to find something bigger than themselves, just trying to find purpose in their lives. And Jesus, when he sees this, he doesn't say, hey, oh, well, my plans are messed up here. We got to go somewhere else now. No, Jesus sees the crowd. And he sees them through God's eyes, and he sees the hunger of the crowd, and he is moved. He is moved to the very depths of his being, and he begins to feed them spiritually. And they begin to feast on the words of the Word, the one who is the bread of life. And then we see something that happens. People, they're having their souls filled, but something begins to happen. They stay there for so long that this spiritual hunger quite naturally becomes physical hunger. And this is where the keen observation skills of the disciples come into hand. For they can see the hunger growing amongst the crowd, that they're out there in the wilderness, in this desert place. There's no food. They've been there for a long time. And so they think, oh, wait, this crowd's going to get hungry, aren't they? We got to do something about this. There's a problem here. And so they run to Jesus. And they say, hey, Jesus, look, everyone's going to be hungry here. You need to do something about this, Jesus. Send them away so they can eat, so we can eat. And so it's someone else's problem then. And this kind of makes me smile, because more often than sometimes we do the exact same thing, don't we? We can see the problem, but we run to someone else to fix it. Maybe we don't feel like we can handle the problem. Maybe we think it's beyond our efforts. But we run to someone else and we say, well, look at this problem here. Look what's happening. Do something about it. As a parent, I've learned that our children do the same thing. And I haven't been a parent for too long here, but we're learning things as we go. And one of the things that McKenna does while she's eating, she's fairly proficient with a fork and spoon and eating, but sometimes she is having a little bit of trouble getting the food. Maybe it's not going in as fast as she wants it. And so she then holds up the fork or holds up the spoon and says, Mommy, help you. Daddy, help you. Because she doesn't want to do it on her own anymore. She wants us to take over and do it for her. And that's often what children do when something becomes difficult. They want their parents to step in. What happens when we begin to do that in our lives? that could have dangerous consequences. You see, when we see the problem, but we fail to engage it, we withhold the nourishment. We might be withholding the nourishment that someone else needs. And we can see this. We can see this happening within our own culture. The Fuller professor, Chap Clark, in his book Hurt and the reprinting of it, Hurt 2.0, names this. He said that within youth culture, there has been what he names as systemic abandonment. Systemic abandonment. And he names three specific ways: in the family, in the schools, and in the church. And what he's essentially naming is that each and every one sees the problem, sees the issue in the youth's lives, but it passes it off, either because people are too busy, or because they want to meet their own needs, or because they think it's too big. But he's naming that youth then are left alone to walk this adolescent tightrope by themselves and with their peers. Because people have seen the problem, but they're not engaging it. And so what does Jesus do? Jesus could step up. Jesus could say, okay, I see that. I'll just fix it here. He can take it into his own hands. But that's not what Jesus does at all. Jesus, as this teacher trying to get the disciples to live into this kingdom narrative, the narrative of the gospel, invites them to take action. Jesus uses them. For this kingdom narrative is a participatory story. This is not spectator faith that Jesus is trying to teach. He is calling them to live into the gospel. And so what does Jesus do? He turns the question back around on them and he says, you see that they're hungry? You give them something to eat then. You see the problem? Engage it. You hear the kingdom words? Now embody them. Live them out. Live the gospel for these people to see. And this is huge for us today. Huge for us. Because in this postmodern millennial generation, people are not looking at us as followers of Jesus and saying, whoa, that's really great. You guys have really awesome doctrine. I want to be like you. Or they're not coming to us and saying, wow, you have a great church constitution. I want to be part of you. No. They're looking at our lives and saying, do I want to be like that person? Do I want to live like they live? And so that's what Jesus calls them to do. Have an embodied apologetic for the gospel. But the disciples, they're realists, aren't they? They say, whoa, Jesus. You want us to do what? They must have looked at Jesus like he had two heads going there. Are you crazy, Jesus? How are we going to feed these people? We don't have the resources to feed these people. We don't have the money. And it would take 6 months just to get enough money to feed these people. And I doubt they're going to sit there for 6 months while we do that. So what are we supposed to do, Jesus? And besides that, we're tired. We've already gone out. You've already sent us out to proclaim the gospel. We have nothing left. We've done our time. Now what do we have left to give? But Jesus doesn't accept their excuses. Even though their excuses might seem valid. Even though I find myself in their place. We see a lot of that in the skit today, from Bryce and Susie. We often have those same sort of excuses. I don't have enough of Jesus. I don't have the resources for what you're calling me to do. I can't do this. I can't possibly be the one. No, Jesus, you've got the wrong person here. And besides, I don't really want to do it, Jesus. Send someone else. Find someone else. This is too big for me. This is beyond me. But Jesus doesn't want the excuses. In fact, when they come to him with the excuses, Jesus turns around and says, you don't think what you have enough? Go and see what you do have. Open your eyes. You see, when we speak these excuses over and over again, I'm not this, I'm not that, I can't, these words have power. These words have power in our lives. Amen. And they weave this web of lies until we cannot see the gifts that we do have. We only see ourselves for what we are not. And so Jesus says, look again. Search a little longer. Look a little deeper and see what you have. And so what do the disciples do? They go out and they find that they have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Seems like nothing. This is just too little to address the situation, but Jesus doesn't ask us to evaluate what we have. Jesus just asks us to go and see, and then take what little we have, even though it might not seem like anything, and place it in His hands, and see God's kingdom glory be birthed out of that, break out through what little we have. And as I was reflecting on this week, I thought about a specific time on a youth trip here at Bethel, where I saw this sort of kingdom glory break out from just a small act. It's something that didn't seem like much at the time. It was when we went to Door in Chicago, so Brody and Ken were on that trip, and so was Jeff. Yeah. And on the last night of that trip, we were given this task to go out into the community and to buy or get dinner for ourselves. And we were each just given $1. And we had 10 people in our group, so we had $10 to feed 10 people. How are we going to do that? And of course, there's some sense of panic in the group, at least by certain individuals in the group. And we were trying to figure out what were we going to do. So we walked to the store, and we ended up buying food there at this grocery store nearby where we were staying. And the amazing thing is that some of the youth wanted to have at least $1 left over so we could tithe that $1 back to the Lord. And so we did that. We bought the food that we needed with $9. We had $1 left over. And then we went to this park nearby, and we were eating. We were just sitting around, talking, eating, when Carl and Elaine's grandson, Corey, sees that there's this person walking by, and we had bought peanuts. That was one of the items we bought. So he goes over to them, and he talks to them a little bit, and gives them some of the peanuts. Seems like nothing, a small act. Yet through that small act, God's kingdom can break through. But the story doesn't end there. On our way back to the place that we were staying, to the church building where we were staying, a man stops us. And he was asking us if we had any money to get to another part of Chicago. And as it turned out, all that we had was $1. But it was $1 that we intentionally wanted to give back to the Lord, and now the Lord had put this man in our path. But beyond just giving the $1, there was a certain individual, Patrick, who had felt the Lord telling him to bring his money along. And at that time, he gave what little money that he had to the man as well. And it was just this little bit, this little act. And we didn't have much, but God could use that. And God can use whatever little bit that we have. And I've learned this over and over again in ministry. When I don't feel like I have enough, when I don't think that I can do something, I hear the voice of the Lord saying, it's not you. It's not you at all. Just give me what you have and see the kingdom break through. And what happens? What happens when the disciples do this? We see that this kingdom community is birthed. And we see this in this picture here. Oh, wait. Sorry, at Sharon, they don't have a clicker. Perhaps. Okay, so there's this kingdom community. Kingdom community that breaks out in the midst of this. In the midst of this hunger, in the midst of this anxiety that makes hope seem like an impossible-ism, in the midst of people feeling like they don't have enough resources, we find that community is birthed. Community that is wild. Community that is centered around Jesus. And this community is an organic community. It's not some sort of prepackaged, pre-planned community that the disciples did through their own power. And so this community doesn't happen through our spectacles or our shows that we want to put on. This community that breaks out there in the desert, there in the midst of this desolate place, is a community that is organic, that grows around Jesus, and that grows by people being present to the presence of Jesus and reaching out into the hunger of the world around them. But there's another thing that stands out about this community to me. This painting is done by Euleria Clark, and we actually looked at this at our last Pastor Pier back in August. It was the last one that Pastor Wanda Stouffer led with us, our former regional pastor now. And one of the things that stood out to me about this painting and this community, this depiction of her depiction of the feeding of the 5,000, is that it is a messy community. And there's this sort of messy holiness that is breaking out there. We don't see just austere Puritans patiently sitting in their pews. No, we see people just feasting and enjoying the presence of Jesus. In fact, Jesus doesn't even care if people are ceremonially clean within the story. Something that he's critiqued on just in the next chapter of Mark, when the Pharisees see that his disciples are not washing their hands after they return from the marketplace. No, we see within this that Jesus is focused on people enjoying the presence of the kingdom. The presence of the kingdom breaking in around them. And the glory that that brings. And so, if we stop and think about our story today, and think about the hunger in the world around us, let's pause and listen. Let's listen. Because there is a rumbling rumble of thunderous hunger that is echoing in the world around us. People are hungry. They are hungry. And they are longing for anything to take away that hunger. One of the things we talked about in Pastor Pier this past week is the growing epidemic of heroin in our own community. People are longing for anything to take away the hunger. And they're trying to devour anything that will satisfy that hunger. They turn to stuff as if stuff would satisfy the hunger, but all the stuff does is rot in their gut. They turn to relationships and devour each other in relationship, but with each person we devour, we find ourselves more empty inside. And so people are longing for something. And so in the midst of this hunger, in the midst of this desire for something that is bigger, this desire for community, this desire for purpose in our lives, it is us as God's people to be a foretaste of this kingdom. A foretaste, just as the disciples were a foretaste and served as a foretaste for the kingdom of God within the story. It is up to be this foretaste of the kingdom of God, to give people just a taste of God's kingdom goodness. And this foretaste doesn't happen by us just passively sitting back and looking at the problem. This foretaste happens by us engaging, by us embodying Jesus' words and taking what little we have, our bodies, our lives, our love, and placing those in Jesus' hands as living sacrifices, as we heard James quoting Romans 12:1 this morning. Living sacrifices and seeing God's kingdom being birthed through that. And this foretaste, it doesn't happen by us creating sugar-coated structures and spectacles. No, it happens by us organically entering into God's kingdom and pointing towards the one who is the bread of life. The one whose body was broken for us to heal our brokenness. The one who shed his blood so that blood would run through our veins, enabling us to dance and move in the joy of the kingdom. For being a foretaste of the kingdom is about unleashing that kingdom joy. That joy that takes away that gnawing, biting anxiety that stirs within our souls. That kingdom joy that shines light in the desolate and deserted places where shadows cast shadows of despair. And as I thought about that kingdom joy this week, I saw a beautiful picture of it. We live right in Plain City. And this week I was out running. And as I was running down this road that faces the old elementary school playground. There's an old elementary school right in town. and there's this playground out and behind it. As I'm running down the road, I noticed someone swinging on the swing set. I noticed they look a little too big to be swinging on the swing set. But it wasn't a child, it wasn't a youth there. It was an adult swinging on the swing set. And I thought, well, maybe they're there with a child, a grandchild. I couldn't tell how old they were. And I was like, I go a bit closer and I noticed, no, there's no child there. They're just there swinging on the swing set. But I noticed that there was a bike nearby, and I noticed that they were wearing a bike helmet. And so this beautiful picture of joy was framed for me. That this person could stop and just be so carefree that they could just enjoy God's creation and just swing like they were a child again. And that is the beauty and the freeness of this kingdom joy. This joy that we offer to the world as a foretaste of God's kingdom. And so I invite you all of you, to take what little you have. Look inside yourselves. Take those gifts that you've been given, those 5 loaves, those 2 fish, and don't evaluate them. Don't think about whether it's enough. Just place it in God's hands and see God's kingdom joy break out.